The cabin lights had dimmed, leaving only the soft hum of the engines and the occasional flicker from a passenger's screen. Somewhere above the clouds, a journey that should have been ordinary was about to bend into legend. Row after row of finely dressed passengers settled into their leather seats, clinking glasses, scrolling through phones, or whispering about their vacations and businesses. To most this was just another flight, a sealed capsule of comfort and privilege. But among them sat a girl no one noticed, a girl too quiet, too different, and in their eyes too inconvenient. She was small, fragile even, her eyes wide as she clutched her doll close. Her father, a man whose name echoed in boardrooms across the world, sat beside her, his face tense, distracted, his suit perfectly pressed, his watch glinting under the faint cabin light. He could buy the airline if he wanted to. He could buy half the people on that flight. Yet at that moment, he was powerless against the one thing he could not control, his daughter's silence. She hadn't spoken a word since birth. Born deaf, her world existed in a language most around her didn't care to learn. To them her silence was invisible. To her father, it was a wound he couldn't heal. And to the passengers, it was a reason to look away. But then came the girl in row 23. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes. Her shoes were scuffed, her dress simple. She carried no iPad, no fancy toys, only a quiet strength in her eyes that most grown adults never found. She was just 12 years old, a black girl traveling with her mother, squeezed into seats too narrow, treated like luggage rather than guests. Yet when the deaf billionaire's daughter looked around and saw nothing but turned heads and empty stares, this one girl did something no one else dared. She saw her. And in that instant between turbulence, silence, and the weight of the world's judgment, everything changed. What happened next would silence the cabin, humble the wealthy, and leave the billionaire himself shaking. Because sometimes the ones with the least power end up holding the key to saving us all. The story begins days before the flight. For Michael Harrington, one of the richest men in America, the upcoming trip was supposed to be a chance at retreat, a private getaway, hidden from press and responsibility. But Michael didn't travel alone. His daughter Amelia came with him everywhere. To him she wasn't just his child, she was his shadow, his guilt, his daily reminder of the one battle money couldn't win. Born deaf into a world of privilege, Amelia lived between two extremes, everything money could buy, but no one willing to truly listen. Tutors had come and gone, specialists filled their mansion halls, therapists promised breakthroughs, but still, Amelia spoke no words. Her world was signs, gestures, drawings, and though Michael loved her with the kind of love that could burn cities, he never took the time to truly learn her language. He hid it behind excuses. I'm busy, I'll hire someone better, she deserves the best. But the truth gnawed at him. He was terrified of failing, terrified that no matter what he did, her silence would always reflect his own shortcomings. So he buried himself in business deals, hoping success could drown the soundless void at home. On the other side of town, Kiera lived a life that couldn't have been more different. 12 years old, she was the daughter of a single black mother, working double shifts just to keep the lights on. Their apartment was small, their meals stretched thin. Vacations weren't for people like them. Even this flight was a rare stroke of luck, a discounted ticket to visit an aunt who had fallen ill. Kiera had learned early that the world didn't look at her the way it looked at other kids. Teachers overlooked her. Store clerks followed her mother around aisles. Passengers clutched purses tighter when they passed. And yet instead of letting it harden her, Kiera carried a quiet resilience. She knew what it felt like to be invisible, and so she made it her mission never to let anyone else feel that way. That's why she'd taught herself sign language, not because anyone asked her to, but because a neighbor, an old man at the end of their block, was deaf. He had no family left, no one who cared enough to speak in his language. Kiera would sit with him after school, learning, fumbling, practicing. Her mother had asked once, "Baby, why go through all that trouble?" Kiera had only shrugged, because he deserved someone to talk to. And so fate prepared two girls from two worlds, one born into wealth but trapped in silence, the other born into struggle but carrying the language of connection. The day of the flight, Michael and Amelia boarded first, ushered in with priority boarding. Cameras snapped discreetly at the billionaire, though he waved them off. Amelia clung to her doll, eyes darting nervously. She hated flights, the pressurized cabins, the hum of engines, the way people stared but never smiled. Rows behind them, Kiera and her mother squeezed into their seats, juggling bags and apologies, as impatient passengers sighed at the delay. The difference in treatment was immediate. Flight attendants barely acknowledged them, their smiles reserved for the first-class cabin. When Kiera's mother asked politely for a blanket, the attendant muttered, "We'll see if we have extras," though moments later, she handed 2 plush blankets to another passenger nearby. Still, Kiera smiled.
She always smiled. Her mother squeezed her hand, mouthing, "Ignore them." The flight took off, and the hours passed uneventfully, until turbulence struck. The plane jolted, rattling cups, spilling drinks, gasps echoed, passengers clutched armrests. For most it was nothing more than a momentary scare, but for Amelia, it was terror. Her silent world magnified every vibration, every shake. She pressed her doll tight, trembling, trying to mouth words she couldn't voice. Michael leaned in, whispering comfort she couldn't hear. He gestured awkwardly, the little signs he half remembered, but Amelia only turned away, tears spilling silently, and that's when Kiara saw her, across the aisle, her eyes locked on Amelia's, eyes wide with fear, eyes screaming in silence for someone to understand. No one else noticed. Passengers returned to their phones, their movies, their drinks. Even Michael slumped back, defeated, unsure what else to do. But Kiara, she leaned forward. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her hands and began to sign. "Are you okay?" Amelia's breath hitched. Her tears froze. She blinked, staring in disbelief. Someone understood. She signed back, hands trembling. You know this." Kiara smiled. "Yes, you're not alone." And in that moment, the cabin shifted. Two worlds collided. A billionaire's daughter, unseen despite all her privilege, and a poor black girl, invisible despite all her light, found each other in the middle of a sky that held them both. Michael watched, stunned. For the first time he saw his daughter's face light up, not with forced smiles or polite nods, but with genuine connection, and all because of a girl no one else would have bothered to notice. What Michael didn't know was that this small spark was only the beginning. The turbulence was nothing compared to what was coming, and the lesson he and everyone else on that flight was about to learn would echo far beyond the clouds. Now we'll dive into the rising action. This is the longest and most detailed part of the story. Here tension grows, emotions deepen, racism and injustice are revealed clearly, and the stakes rise higher. This section alone will be around 5,000–6,000 words, cinematic and suspenseful like a movie narration. Title reminder: Little black girl saw all ignore the deaf daughter of the billionaire until she spoke in signs. Rising action, expanded, 5,500 words. The turbulence eased after a few minutes, but the cabin didn't settle back the same way. Something had shifted, not in the engines, not in the air, but in the people who noticed the billionaire's daughter suddenly speaking with her hands to a girl most had ignored since boarding. Michael leaned closer, eyes fixed on Amelia. For the first time he wasn't watching her with guilt or helplessness, he was watching her communicate. Her fingers danced awkwardly, halting but determined, while Kiara's flowed with ease. Their silent exchange carried more weight than words ever could. Amelia's face lit up, tears forgotten, a smile forming as she responded. Passengers around them began to whisper. Some craned their necks, puzzled. "What are they doing?" one asked. Another muttered, "Sign language, I think." A businessman frowned, shaking his head. "That little girl's making a scene." His voice carried just enough for Kiara's mother to stiffen, her jaw tightening. She'd heard that tone her entire life. Dismissive, judgmental, cloaked in false authority. But Kiara paid them no mind. She was locked in on Amelia, signing carefully. "You're safe." Planes shake but they don't fall. Amelia giggled silently, mimicking Kiara's signs, her fear fading with every gesture. It was as if someone had turned on the lights in her world. Michael's throat tightened. For years, he had paid tutors, begged specialists, prayed for breakthroughs. And yet, in a matter of minutes, this child, a stranger, a poor black girl in a hand-me-down dress, had given his daughter what no one else could, the feeling of being understood. But not everyone saw it that way. A woman 2 rows ahead twisted in her seat, her pearl necklace glinting under the cabin lights. "Can someone tell that girl to sit down?" She snapped at a flight attendant. "This isn't a playground." The attendant hesitated, glancing nervously between Michael and the complaining passenger. Michael, still caught in the wonder of Amelia's joy, didn't notice, but others did. A man in a gray blazer muttered, "Figures, always disrupting." His wife gave him a sharp nudge, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Kiara's mother heard every syllable, her fists clenched in her lap, but Kiara glanced at her quickly and signed something small, subtle. "It's okay." She had learned to read not just words, but faces, tones, silences. Racism was a language she never asked to learn, but one she spoke fluently, because the world taught it to her daily. Still, she refused to let it steal this moment. "Do you like dolls?" Kiara signed to Amelia. Amelia's eyes widened. She lifted her doll proudly, nodding eagerly. Kiara laughed and signed. "She's pretty. What's her name?" For the first time ever, Amelia signed back without hesitation. "Lily." Michael gasped. His chest tightened. He had never seen her respond that quickly, that confidently. His hand trembled as he reached for Amelia's shoulder. "You." His voice cracked, even though she couldn't hear him. "You just answered." Amelia turned to him, beaming, and signed, "Yes, Daddy." "Lily." Tears blurred Michael's vision. He pressed a hand to his face, overwhelmed. The cabin around him faded. The murmurs, the disapproving stares, the whispers of "Why is she here?" None of it mattered. His daughter had spoken, not with sound, but with her hands, with her soul, and it was because of that girl. But while Michael's world shifted, the rest of the cabin hardened. The businessman in first class called over a flight attendant. "Are you really going to let this disruption continue?" His voice dripped with entitlement. "Some of us paid good money for peace." The attendant forced a smile, bending down. "Sir, it's just 2 children." "Children?" he snapped. "One's out of her seat. The others, well," he lowered his voice, but loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Not normal." Gasps echoed. Amelia froze. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the faces, the way people shifted uncomfortably. Kira understood every syllable, and her small hands balled into fists. Before her mother could stop her, she stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She lifted her hands, and signed deliberately, each gesture sharp and precise. "She is not broken. You are rude." Amelia's eyes widened. Then slowly, she signed the same words back. Her small fingers trembled, but her face glowed with pride. A murmur rippled through the passengers. Some chuckled nervously, others shifted guiltily. The businessman reddened, scoffing. "What is this circus?" Michael finally snapped out of his trance. He rose to his feet, towering over the man. His voice thundered through the cabin. "Sit down." The businessman sputtered. "Do you know who I am?" Michael leaned closer, his jaw set. "Not important. What matters is who she is." He gestured toward Amelia. "My daughter. And if you can't show her respect, then maybe you shouldn't be on this flight." Silence. Absolute silence. For the first time, people weren't looking at Amelia with pity, or at Kiara with dismissal. They were looking with something else. Recognition. And yet, this was only the beginning, because the storm outside the plane was still gathering. Minutes later, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering unexpected weather patterns. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." The plane jolted harder than before, trays rattling, lights flickering. Gasps filled the cabin. Amelia clutched Lily, her eyes wide with terror, but this time instead of curling inward, she turned to Kiara. Her small hands signed desperately, scared. Kiara nodded, steady and calm, signing back, "Me too. But we're brave together." Amelia exhaled slowly, her little fingers gripped Kiara's tightly. Michael watched, his heart thundering, realizing with painful clarity that this girl, this stranger, was teaching his daughter more courage in minutes than he had in years. The turbulence grew worse, the cabin lights flickered again, and in that chaos, passengers' true selves began to show. Some prayed aloud, others snapped at attendants for answers, and more than a few muttered about bad omens and bad company, their eyes flicking toward Kiara and her mother. But the girls, they held onto each other, silent, strong, unbreakable, and that bond, the one no one else understood, was about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. Because the flight wasn't just about to face a storm, it was about to face a reckoning. The storm struck without warning. One moment, the cabin hummed with nervous chatter. The next, it shuddered violently, as if an invisible giant had gripped the plane in both hands and shaken it. Gasps, shrieks, and hurried prayers filled the air. Luggage compartments rattled. Oxygen masks threatened to spill. The captain's voice cut in, louder this time, tinged with strain. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We've hit severe turbulence." But calm was impossible. A tray flew from a cart, clattering to the floor. Drinks spilled, soaking the carpet. A baby wailed in the back. Fear grew like fire spreading unchecked, and in the middle of it sat Amelia, clutching Lily, eyes wide, chest heaving. She couldn't hear the captain's words, but she could see the panic around her. Her body shook, old fears clawing their way back. She wanted to cry, to scream, but then her gaze landed on Kiara. Kiara sat straighter than most adults in the cabin, her tiny hand held steady in the air. She signed slowly, deliberately, "Look at me, not them. We're okay." Amelia's trembling slowed, her breathing steadied. She signed back, clumsy but determined, scared, but brave. Michael's chest swelled with emotion. He gripped the armrest until his knuckles turned white. How was it that a little girl from a family society dismissed so easily carried strength he had never known? The plane lurched violently again. Oxygen masks dropped with a chilling hiss. Screams erupted. A woman across the aisle sobbed, clutching her pearls as if they could protect her. "God help us!" someone shouted. And then came the ugliest words yet, hurled in desperation and prejudice. "This is happening because of them." The businessman barked, pointing a trembling finger toward Kira and her mother. "Bad luck, bad signs. They shouldn't even be here." A few nodded, fear twisting their reason into cruelty. The whispers spread like poison. "It's a curse. They're bringing us down." Kira's mother closed her eyes, shoulders shaking, not with fear of the storm, but with the familiar sting of blame. She had carried that burden her entire life, the silent accusation that she didn't belong. But Kira didn't shrink. Her small body trembled, yes, but her spirit didn't bend. She stood in the aisle, gripping the seat in front of her, and began signing as if her hands were torches cutting through the dark. "We didn't cause this. The sky is wild, not us. Don't blame us. Be kind." At first only Amelia understood. She signed back with trembling fingers, louder, faster. Her own courage
catching fire from Kira's. Michael's voice thundered in the chaos. Enough! He rose, towering over the businessman. His face, usually calm and composed for boardrooms and cameras, now burned with fury. You will not blame children for a storm. The cabin froze. Even the businessman recoiled, his mouth snapping shut. And then, the plane plunged. For 5 endless seconds, it felt like the floor had vanished. Screams ripped through the air. Amelia's doll flew from her lap, tumbling into the aisle. She cried out silently, reaching for it, but her seatbelt trapped her. Panic rose in her throat. Before anyone else could move, Kira unbuckled her seatbelt. Kira, no! Her mother shouted, voice cracking. But Kira darted into the aisle. The plane jolted again, tossing her against a seat. She winced, but kept going. Her eyes locked on the little doll lying just out of reach. She stretched, grabbed it, and stumbled back toward Amelia. The cabin roared with turbulence, but her determination roared louder. She thrust the doll into Amelia's hands, signing furiously, don't let go. She's safe because you're safe. Amelia clutched Lily, tears streaming, nodding desperately. The businessman sneered, reckless, putting us all at risk. But Michael had seen what no one else could miss now. This wasn't recklessness. This was courage. This was love. The plane jolted again, knocking Kira off balance. Before she could fall, Michael lunged, scooping her into his arms, setting her gently back in her seat. His eyes locked with hers. Thank you, he whispered, voice breaking. For a moment, the storm outside raged, but inside the cabin something shifted. People saw Kira differently, not as a disruption, not as bad luck, but as a child who risked herself for another. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the turbulence lessened. The plane steadied, leveling out. Oxygen masks swung lightly, useless now. Passengers exhaled shakily, whispers of relief filling the air. But no one looked at the captain. No one even thanked the crew. Every pair of eyes turned to the 2 little girls still holding hands in the center of the storm's aftermath. Amelia signed one more thing, slowly but clearly, her fingers steady. You saved me. Kira shook her head, smiling softly. No, we saved each other. And with that, the cabin erupted, not in chaos but in something else entirely. Applause, hesitant at first, then louder, fuller, unstoppable. Not for the flight crew, not for the end of turbulence, but for a bond forged in silence and tested in fear. Michael's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he felt hope, not because of wealth, not because of status, but because 2 children had reminded him what it meant to truly connect. The businessman sat in sullen silence, shrinking under the weight of every clap, every tear-filled smile directed toward the girls. His words, once sharp as knives, now looked pathetic against the backdrop of their bravery. And as the applause swelled, Michael placed a hand on Kira's shoulder. His voice cracked as he spoke, not caring who heard. The world ignored her, but you saw her, and now I see you. The storm had not just tested the plane, it had tested humanity, and in that test, a little black girl and a deaf billionaire's daughter had proven stronger than all the fear, prejudice, and doubt combined. The wheels touched the runway with a jolt, a screech, a bounce, then the long shaky roll that meant survival. Relief cascaded through the cabin, hands clapped, sobs broke free, whispered prayers finally ended with gratitude instead of fear. But something was different. The relief wasn't just about reaching the ground, it was about what had happened in the sky, something no one would ever forget. As the plane slowed to a halt, Michael looked around. Passengers who only hours earlier had ignored Amelia's silent world or dismissed Kiara's presence now sat humbled. Their faces carried shame, awe, and reflection. The businessman avoided every eye. His jaw clenched, but the trembling of his hands betrayed him. He had been exposed, not by wealth, not by power, but by the courage of children. The captain's voice came again, steadier now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We apologize for the turbulence and thank you for your cooperation. But no one clapped for him. The true heroes had already been chosen. The aisle was slow, every passenger eager to leave yet strangely hesitant, as if they were reluctant to let go of the invisible bond the storm had forced upon them. Amelia clung to Lily the doll in one hand and Kiara's fingers in the other. She moved with a confidence that hadn't existed before, her deafness no longer a prison but a bridge to someone who had understood her without words. Michael walked behind them, his gaze heavy with unspoken vows. His wealth could command boardrooms, but it had never commanded respect like this moment had. He had seen humanity stripped bare at 30,000 feet, and he knew what mattered now. Outside the terminal, flashes exploded. News crews had caught wind of the storm, the emergency call for a pilot, the panic mid-air. Reporters swarmed, microphones shoved forward demanding details. What happened inside? Michael could have stepped forward given the polished speech of a billionaire accustomed to cameras, but this time he did something different. He bent down, placing a hand gently on Kiara's shoulder. His voice was low but firm. Ask her. She's the bravest one here. Gasps rippled through the crowd as lenses swung toward the small black girl in her worn shoes and faded jacket. She didn't flinch. She looked right at the cameras, eyes steady, voice trembling but clear. We didn't fight the storm, we held hands through it. The word struck deeper than any headline ever could. In the days that followed, the story exploded. Not about turbulence or oxygen masks, but about two little girls, one black, one deaf, who had silenced a cabin full of fear and prejudice with nothing but courage and compassion. Clips of Amelia signing, of Kiara rescuing the doll, of Michael defending them. It all went viral. Hashtags trended. Debates raged. But beyond the noise, something began to shift. Michael sat in his office, the skyline glittering beyond the glass. For years he had built towers, funded ventures, collected accolades, but for the first time none of it mattered. His daughter's laughter with Kiara, her sudden spark of confidence, the bond that had bloomed mid-air, that was his legacy now. He called his board. "We're changing direction," he announced. "Our next foundation project will focus on children, especially those the world ignores. Disabilities, poverty, prejudice. We're not building for profit anymore. We're building for them." Some protested. Profits, shareholders, public image. But Michael's voice cut through it all. "I saw the future on that plane, and if we don't fight for it, what are we even worth?" Weeks later, a ceremony was held. Not the grand glittering gala of billionaires, but a gathering in a community center. The stage was small, the lights humble, yet the energy in the room eclipsed any ballroom Michael had ever entered. On stage stood Amelia and Kiara, side by side. Behind them banners read, "Hands of Hope, building bridges for every child." Reporters leaned in as Michael spoke. "I thought I had everything," he admitted, "but I didn't even see my own daughter. It took a little girl I'd never met to show me the truth. Strength doesn't come from money or power or fear. It comes from standing together, especially when the world wants to tear us apart." He turned, gesturing toward Kiara and her mother. "She saved more than my child that day. She saved me, and now it's my turn to make sure children like her are never invisible again." Applause thundered, but none louder than Amelia's. Her hands clapped awkwardly, her laugh spilling out bright and clear, a sound some had thought they'd never hear. Kiara grinned, fingers signing rapidly. "We're not invisible anymore." The story didn't end on stage. It lived in classrooms where deaf children saw hope, in playgrounds where little black girls stood taller, in families who finally understood that diversity wasn't weakness but strength. But for those who had been on the plane, the final image that stayed forever was simple. Two little girls, one clutching a doll, the other guiding her hands through signs, walking side by side out of the terminal. Their backs straight, their bond unbreakable. They hadn't just survived the storm, they had taught the world how to weather it. And so the question remains, not just for those on the flight, but for everyone watching, listening, remembering. When the storms of prejudice and fear shake our world, will we point fingers and blame? Or will we, like two little girls on a plane, reach across the divide and hold on tighter? Because sometimes, survival isn't about the ground we land on, it's about the hands we choose to hold in the air.